average person is told that the Germans were out to conquer the world under Hitler, that they first started with Poland, then they went on to France and Belgium and the Netherlands, then they said, time for Norway. You know, I think Norway came before. Time for Norway. Then at one point they turned east and said, we'll have Yugoslavia and Greece. And this was all part of conquering the world. And then, of course, the Soviet Union itself. But is it really true that that was what Hitler was doing? Was he really conquering these countries as part of a campaign of conquest and eventually to take their territory? When you look at it, that's not the way it was. In Poland, he had demands, but he was inveigled into a war, which he certainly was fatal for him and for Germany, by dreadful cruelties against the German population in Poland. For example, in a town called Bromberg, they killed thousands of Germans. The tortures and mutilations of Germans were just fantastic, and that was largely what pushed him. But then you go on to Norway. It was not part of a plan of world conquest. In fact, he had no intention of setting foot in Norway, except that the British sent a fleet to secure Norway for themselves. And Hitler said, well, I need the iron ore of Sweden and Norway. I need iron ore for the war. And he had to quickly send his forces to Norway. So it was the British who brought Norway into the war. Again, look at an example like Greece and Yugoslavia. It was a British fleet and army that landed in Greece, and Hitler had to say, oh my God, they're going to threaten the Romanian oil fields on which I depend. I need the oil of Romania to conduct this war. The British have endless oil in the Middle East. They can fuel their war machine, but now they've come to Greece, they're going to send bombers to bomb the Romanian oil fields. So a German army was diverted to Greece. Certainly wasn't good for them, but it had to be done. So these were reactive measures, not part of a plan of world conquest. These were enemy encroachments which he reacted to one by one. As for the big campaign against Russia, yeah, he may have had long-term plans. They eventually one day they'll seek to colonize Russia, but at that time he invaded Russia without even winter equipment. The Germans froze in the Russian steppes. The reason was, as Hitler explained in his speech to the German people, the Soviet Union was about to strike. It had built up the largest army in the world with a view to conquering all of Western Europe. And they were about to strike. He launched a preemptive strike. So that hardly seems like a war of conquest. It was more, we will sacrifice ourselves to save Germany and all of Europe. Now, again, we ask why. People say that the Germans wanted to rule all of Europe and to conquer it and to rule it and to enslave it. So that would include Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, Slovakia, Finland. Funny thing is, far from him conquering them, they fought with him. Now this is something that your average lemming, your average man on the street doesn't know. They say, well, Germany started the war there, Germany was the enemy, and they had Italy as a sidekick. Not one in 1,000 Canadians or Americans know that it wasn't Germany and Italy, it was Finland, Croatia, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria. All these countries together fought against the Soviet Union. They fought in alliance. It seems pretty ludicrous to say that the Germans were conquering these people when in fact they were fighting with Germany, in alliance with Germany. They were some of the best fighters. And was it just these countries? No, it wasn't just these countries. It was also the peoples of Europe. There were volunteers from Sweden, from Spain. There was a huge contingent from Spain fighting with the Germans. From France, the Charlemagne division, the 33rd SS division, the Charlemagne division, was among the bravest. The Belgians contributed a big contingent that fought in the east with the German army. under a man called Leon Degrelle. And at the end of the war, when Hitler was besieged, Russian troops just about surrounded him. Who was fighting fighting around Hitler? There was only, at the end there was only one unit left. It was a French division. French troops were fighting to protect the chancellery at that critical moment. So when you look at it, France was an enthusiastic supporter of the war against Bolshevism, fighting with Germany. When the war ended, the French were shaving the heads of thousands of their people, including thousands of, not thousands, hundreds of thousands of women, saying, you're all collaborators. Well, why did all these people fight with the Germans, one would ask. So was it a German fight, or was it a crusade of the European peoples to defend themselves from Jewish Bolshevism? This is not the picture of a Germany out to conquer the world, when so many of the peoples around it were fighting with Germany. A fact which is carefully concealed. Okay? Now, at the end of it, people will say the Second World War started when Hitler invaded Poland, and of course we knew he'd go for more, but we had to, if we didn't defend Poland, if we couldn't defend Poland, we couldn't defend anyone. And that was his first step, we had to stop him there. Churchill himself said it when he was asked about the Polish demands made against the Soviet Union, that the Soviet troops, Red Army is on our territory, and they're raping our women, they're dismantling our factories. Churchill said, well, we went to war on the principle of sovereignty for Poland. Now, here's the thing. Is it true, this argument, that the world went to war on the principle of sovereignty for Poland? If we didn't defend Poland, we couldn't defend anything else. Now, first of all, Poland was invaded simultaneously by the Germans and the Soviet Union, acting in concert. Hitler actually made an agreement with his greatest enemy, the Jew Bolsheviks. The Jew Bolsheviks were so anxious to have this agreement, to gain time and to gain forward bases, that they dismissed the Jewish Commissar for Foreign Affairs. The foreign minister had been a man called Litvinov, Maxim Litvinov, a Jew. And they replaced him with a man called Vyacheslav Molotov to make it more palatable for the Germans to deal with them. And they together invaded Poland. The Soviets took slightly more than half, in fact. So if the English went to war on the principle of sovereignty for Poland, why didn't they declare war on the Soviet Union? Far from it, they let the Soviet Union have that half of Poland. The war ended with the Soviet Union keeping that half of Poland, and the Poles moved westward and displaced the Germans of Silesia. Now, Churchill did this very cynically. He and Stalin sat together and they placed 3 cigarettes in a row. And then they moved the cigarettes westward, so to speak. Said, this is how it will happen. The Poles will move west and Germans will lose land. Germans will have to leave their homes. The Eastern Poles will move to Western Poland, and the Soviets will do what they like in Eastern Poland. And in fact, they moved in Russians and other nationalities into Eastern Poland. And that is how the war ended. When the Polish Home Army appealed to Churchill and said, we have fought with you all the way, we have had Polish pilots in the Royal Air Force, we have Polish divisions fighting in Italy, in North Africa with your troops, and now you're saying the Soviets can have half our country and they can dominate it and do what they like. Churchill acted as the agent of the Jew Bolsheviks. He said to them, if you don't accept this, you will be slaves forever, I will just wash my hands and the Soviets can do what they like. I have never met such unreasonable people or such demanding people. Of course, he said it in the Churchillian accent, I have never met such demanding and intolerable and troublesome people. That's how he said it. And here's the biggest issue about Churchill's or anyone's championship of Poland. When the Jew Bolsheviks took half of Poland, they had in their grip much of the Polish aristocracy, including the most critical factor in the aristocracy, the officer class. The officers of the Polish army were mainly aristocrats. They grabbed them and took them away to a camp in Ukraine near Vinica. And they held these Polish officers, over 5,000 of them. And then one day, in a forest called Katyn, and some in Vinica, but mainly in Katyn, Katyn, in one night they shot all those officers, shot them in the back of the neck, and buried them in shallow graves. Now, when the Germans moved eastwards, local people told them about it, and they dug up those graves. The massacre of Katyn exposed. Well, the Germans wanted the whole world to know. They invited delegates from France, England, Britain and the US to come and have a look. And they refused, and Mr. Churchill wrote a memo to the effect, there is no good in morbidly exhuming the graves of whatever happened in Katyn. Now it's morbid to look into a massacre. It's morbid, it's mentally sick to look into it. It is morbidly exhuming the graves and looking into it. And they refused to send any delegations there. So what did the Germans do? They took captured American and British officers, mainly flying officers, pilots, and took them to witness it. And they photographed it and showed all the world. And yet, such was the power of the Jew Bolsheviks over the Western media that the Western media promoted it as a massacre by the Germans, that the Germans killed these Polish officers. Now, that massacre was led by a man called Brodkin, B-R-O-D-K-I-N. Of course, there were many who carried out that massacre, all done in the dead of night, shot in the back of the neck. Brodkin, I've often thought, Brodkin, that's an interesting name. When I look at that movie, Holocaust, Story of the Family Vice, which shows the brutalities of the Germans and how it was so irrational, no reason for it, that movie was produced, the producer of that movie was a man called Brodkin. Sometimes I wonder if they were cousins. I sometimes wonder. Okay? Now, there you look at the claim that the world went to war, the Western world went to war against Germany on the basis of protecting Poland. And what a load of garbage that is. So, the real picture emerges, after seeing all this, the real picture emerges that the Second World War was not a sudden attempt by Germany to conquer the world, to conquer large parts of Europe. Rather, they reacted to things. The central feature of that war was a Bolshevik campaign they were already milking Russia, torturing the Russians, starving the Ukrainians, but starving them and exploiting them to build up an immense army so that they could extend their rule to the whole of Europe. And standing against this was not just Germany, but all the Central Powers, Romania, Bulgaria, Hungary, Slovakia, Croatia. All of these people stood, Finland, to resist that. And they were led by Germany because Germany was the technological and industrial power of the time. These people sacrificed themselves to slow down the Bolshevik destruction of white countries. And far from treating them as the heroes and sacrifices that they were, people believed that they were villains, and they vilified them, reflexively. It's not their fault that they're being misled. Reflexively, this is a slander that has to be corrected, not just for the sake of the Germans, but for the emancipation and survival of the entire Caucasian world, of all the Caucasian peoples. Such is my finding Of course, it's a complex picture. Nobody's an angel, neither the Germans nor the Ukrainians. Nobody was an angel. But this is the broad picture. The Germans fought to save European civilization, far from being the evil conquerors that they're represented as. If there are any questions, I'll be happy to take them.
Well,
are there any questions?
that was a good explanation about the Katyn murder there. That was, that's very straightforward. There's a couple of good explanations there that you gave. Clarifications, should I say.
Yeah, thank you. But at that time, the entire Western world was misled. They were told that the Germans carried out this grisly massacre.
Was that like 1940, like right at the beginning? Like
The massacre was carried out in late 1940 or early 41.
Yeah.
Every Pole knows about Katyn. Every Pole. And today the facts are known. Nobody denies that the Bolsheviks carried out the Katyn massacre, not the Germans. But at the time, Churchill was anxious to cover it up.
Yeah. Remember Gorbachev admitted that publicly, yeah.
Any other questions?
I mean, that was great, man. It covered everything.
Good talk,
That
huh?
would be a great video for the German Society website.
Yeah, we got our logo on it, just for German Society.
Sir, Mr. M.
Yeah, I have a question. I read the book Mein Kampf, and Hitler does talk about Lebensraum, and I had never read in there that he was thinking about expanding up to the Ural Mountains. I only remember reading something about getting back the territories that they lost in the east, so that Germans could have more room to live.
Well,
the country had been diminished.
Well, if we can believe the translation given by William Shirer, I'm not saying you can believe it, I'm not saying you can, but if you can believe it, he said, if we are to look for living space, we are to look east to Russia and her border vassal states. Vassal states meaning the subject states. Now the border vassal states would be Belarus, Ukraine and so forth.
This is what William Shirer says?
Yeah, William Shirer in his book, The Rise and Fall of the Third Reich, translates Mein Kampf in those words.
Okay.
We National Socialists must stop our search for commercial markets and our gaze to the south and west and look eastward, turn east once again. But I think that was a long-term plan to be carried out over centuries. And certainly not in 1941. In 1941, he was faced with a concentration of Russian armies right up to the border, ready to strike. And that's why the Germans were able to cut up the Soviet armies so quickly, because they weren't placed for defense in depth. They were right on the border, poised to strike. They were in eastern Poland. And the Soviet Union was expanding westward. This is the thing. You say Germans were aggressive, but no. The Soviets had already taken eastern Poland. Then they took the Baltic states, all three of them. Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia gobbled up in the space of a day. Russian troops moved in. And the first thing they did was grab all the young men and send them to Siberia. All the young men. Then they conquered Bessarabia, a part of Romania, and Bukovina. So this was just done by brute force, no negotiation. Heavily armed Soviet units move in. So they were already aggressing. None of this was tried at the Nuremberg trials, the planning and execution of aggressive war, the charge against the Germans. They didn't try the Soviet Union for doing the same thing. So this westward movement had already taken place to some extent. It would have happened on a large scale in July of 1941. That was the statement Hitler made in his speech to the German people, that I can see that they're going to do this, they've concentrated their armies, we have to strike first. The language he put was that when I see an enemy raising his rifle to shoot me, I will not wait for him to level and and pull the trigger, I will strike first. So it was a preemptive war, and certainly had to be, because the Germans were ill-equipped for that war.
That's very true. I just cannot remember reading in Mein Kampf that Hitler actually said he wanted to get living space in the east towards.
Well, I can do something. I can read that section,
Okay.
and I do have a copy, and I can relay it to Brian to add to this video.
Sure.
Yeah, sure, good idea.
Yes, sir.
Oh, what are the evidence that the Bolsheviks were Jewish led?
Well, the evidence would come right out of, at the moment anyway, for the moment, out of Wikipedia. The first president of the Soviet Union was Sverdlov, whose real name was quite different. I think his real name was Yurovsky or something like that. He was a Jew, and the most powerful people, Trotsky, Leon Trotsky was really Lev Bronstein, a Jew. There was a committee of 4 that ran the Soviet Union for a while. That one of them was Zinoviev. His real name was Apfelbaum. He was a Jew. Kamenev, real name Rosenfeld. Most powerful man in the Soviet Union arguably was Lazar Kaganovich, the man who masterminded the Holodomor, the starvation and killing of 10 million Ukrainians. The evidence is for you to look at the faces of the people. They were not Slavic, they were not blonde, blue-eyed Slavic people.
Even Putin admitted,
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
publicly. Putin just said a couple of years ago that 85% of the Bolshevik government were Jews.
And Khrushchev once said there are too many Abramoviches and Rabinoviches in the Communist Party. And at one point he told the Prime Minister and ruler of Hungary that don't try to make yourself the Jewish king of Hungary, buddy. You know, our tanks will not support you. Because Hungary after the war was ruled by a Jew Bolshevik regime. I think the name was Nagy, Imre Nagy. Yeah. Well, you would have to study that for yourself, and you will see. Alexander Solzhenitsyn wrote a book about the Gulag archipelago, in which he published the pictures of the 6 people who masterminded and organized this vast system of concentration camps. And I believe all 6 were Jewish. I think one of them was named Frenkel. But you'd have to look at those pictures. Yeah, I'm getting old, I can't remember all the names right now. But Judeo-Bolshevism is a commonly known term, and the Germans have never once hid the fact that they are fighting what they call Judeo-Bolsheviks. They proclaimed it openly. In fact, William Shirer, in his book, questions everything that Hitler says. So any schoolmarm could have told him differently, this was ignorant. But when you read William Shirer's book, Hitler made the claim that with the Soviet Union, Russia had been handed over to the Bolsheviks, which, in Hitler's view, meant to the Jews. Shirer never challenged that statement.
A question about Khrushchev. I know that, at least what my understanding is, the Jews assassinated Stalin, poisoned him to death, and there was an interim figure. Then Khrushchev becomes the leader, and I think he was supposedly a Trotsky. But did Khrushchev not support the Jews? Did he turn against them, or was he neutral?
I cannot give an expert opinion on this. I can give you my limited knowledge on it. And that is, yes, the Soviet Union was ruled by Jew Bolsheviks. But when the German army came in, the German army got to work with what they call the Commissar order, a famous piece of work, the Commissar order. Kill all the commissars. Wherever you find a commissar, meaning a Jewish bureaucrat, not a Jewish, a communist bureaucrat, and they were mainly Jews, according to Hitler, killed them. And the local people also killed them. So by the end of the war, the Jew Bolshevik grip had been very much loosened. So many of them had been killed. And now the Russian communists, there were lower ranking people mainly, Russians, who actually believed in communism. Some of them believed it, some of them just wanted a share of the spoils. You know, to have the limousines and the dashas, the recreation villas. Now, because so many of the Jewish Bolsheviks had been killed, the Russian lower-ranking communists now came up. One of them was Khrushchev, and he made at one point, when the Jews had been weakened, he made an accusation saying that you people have killed and tortured thousands and devastated our society. He meant people like Yagoda, Genrikh Yagoda, a real name Yehuda, who was the secret police chief who not only masterminded the torture of millions and the rape of millions, but also participated in it himself. And he pointed to Lazar Kaganovich, and Lazar Kaganovich said, "And who are you to talk? You were with us in those massacres. Your hands are covered in blood. Who do you think you are, you kurva?" Now, kurva is the Russian word for whore, and he called Khrushchev a kurva. Now, inevitably, as the years went by, these Russians came more to power, and soon you had Russians who believed in the promise of communism running the country. Okay? Now, Stalin, at the end of his life, he all his life had been surrounded by Jewish Bolsheviks and done everything they wanted. But he saw that their power is slipping, and maybe he resented all the times he'd been given orders, and he turned on them and said, "You know what, I'm going to send all of you, every Jew in the Soviet Union, to a place called Birobidjan, which is a territory on the edge of Mongolia, which is hardly not the place you'd want to go to."
Yeah, they're Israel.
Birobidjan is where I'm going to send all of you there. But there was enough Jew Bolsheviks around to get their way and say, "Oh, we can kill you before that."
Yeah.
And how they killed him was that his mistress was Rosa Kaganovich, the sister of Lazar Kaganovich, and she administered a poison to him. Now the poison failed to work, or it worked only halfway, and he was still alive when they thought he was dead. So whatever few Jew Bolsheviks there were decided to aggravate him and anger him so that he'd have a heart attack. And at that time in the room there were a number of ethnic Russian communists. Every one of them, it seems, has a Jewish wife or mistress, because that was their insurance policy, so to speak. You have to join the tribe to get the crumbs that fall from the table of the Bolsheviks. Join the tribe by marrying or having a Jewish mistress or marrying a Jewish wife. That's how they joined the tribe, so to speak. Every one of them, it seems, from Bulgarin downwards, had a Jewish wife or mistress, so they were getting thinking, I don't know if we send them all to Birobidjan, maybe my wife might start clacking at me. Now, where did I read this? It's in a book by one Rappaport, R-A-P-O-P-O-R-T, called Stalin's War Against the Jews, in which he claims that Stalin was at war with the Jews all his life. But he admits in one part that this is how they killed him, and everyone in that room, every ethnic Russian had a Jewish wife or mistress. So it went. Rappaport, yeah.
John?
I don't remember. I read the book, but now I can't remember But it seems that Stalin in his last days turned on the Jew Bolsheviks and said, "Why not Russian Bolsheviks? Why don't we?"
I wish he could have lived longer. I wish Stalin could have stayed in longer.
I don't think so. He was a nasty man.
Yeah.
Thoroughly vicious one. Now, as I said, this is not an expert opinion, but it's the opinion, everything I've said is the opinion of someone who's looked into it beyond the superficial, beyond the movies.
Yeah. What about Khrushchev though? Did he turn against the Jews as well?
Well, I don't know that he had to particularly, or they were already thoroughly weakened.
Yeah, so just more of the Russians taking over. So communism became pretty good after a while, right? It wasn't so bad. It was kind of socialism.
Of Russians will tell you that the best time of their life was in the Brezhnev years.
Yeah.
That they had security, free education, good health care. It was years of stagnation, according to some, but I have met Russians and Belarusians who said it was their best years. That they look back on it with some nostalgia. The Yeltsin years began the chaos.
Yeah.
The chaos that ended in the oligarchs.
Yeah.
Any other questions?
I guess that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Frank, I do.
Do you want to think about it?
We just want to thank Frank Raymond for his talk tonight. I did want to ask you though, I mentioned his book earlier, Sweet Dreams and Terror Cells. Do you have any other books in the works? Or?
Well, there's one in the planning. Let's put it this way. There's one in the planning, and it's going to be a worthy successor to the first. There's certainly a lot going on today that needs writing about.
Yeah, definitely.
Today in the year 2020, we stand on the threshold. We're on the precipice. Either you're going to climb up to the heights or you're going to fall and be dashed on the precipice. There's a lot to be written about. I hope to have the world see it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Fantastic. That was absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
That really absolutely must go on to the Truth and Justice for German Society. Your talk was just brilliant.